Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from AnthonyMorganti.com. This is episode 8 of Questions and Answers. In this episode, we'll be answering 3 Photoshop related questions. Our first question is from Brad, and to tell you the truth, I received this question from multiple people. In episode 2 of your Getting Started in Photoshop series, you combine layers of the church. In the finished image, is there a way to get the window reflections on the floor toned down so they better match the scene? Yes, there is. And for those of you that haven't seen my Getting Started in Photoshop series, below this video I will link to a playlist of all those videos, and you could check them out and you could see specifically what Brad is referring to in episode 2. What is often going to happen to you is you're going to have to photograph a very high contrast scene. And in doing so, many times something will be so bright that if you expose for the other parts of the scene, the bright part is going to be totally blown out, or vice versa. If you expose for the bright part of the scene, the other parts of the image are going to just fall into darkness. And what could you do about it? Well, you could take multiple exposures. In this case, I took one exposure for the windows, and I exposed properly for the windows. Then I took another exposure for the church itself, or the room itself, so the room was properly exposed. And then I combined the images in as layers in Photoshop and used layer masks to properly expose or have a properly exposed image. But in doing so, a lot of people thought, and probably rightfully so, that the reflections of the windows on the tile floor are a little bright. Maybe we should tone those down. Well, how would we go about doing that? Well, there's a lot of different ways. In Photoshop, there's always 1,000 different ways to do the exact same thing. So how I would probably approach it is I would, first of all, want either a flattened layer, that is one layer that is this scene right here. And you could do that. We could flatten these and we'll have one layer. Another thing we could do is we could put a combined layer on top of the layer stack. So that combined layer is basically the combination of these 3 layers. So let's do that. To do that, there's a rather complicated keyboard shortcut. It's holding in the Shift, Option, Command, and E keys if you have a Mac. They would be Shift, Alt, Control, E. Now we have a layer that is actually the combination of all these other layers. See, if I turn those off, nothing changes because the top layer is all the combination of those 3 layers. So we have this layer. Now what are we going to do? Well, I think what I'd want to do first is convert it to a smart object. If I convert it to a smart object and I add any filters to it, I could go back in and readjust those filters later. For a normal layer, you wouldn't be able to do that. And I do cover this in subsequent episodes of that Getting Started in Photoshop series. So to convert this into a smart object, I'm going to right click on the layer and go down to Convert to Smart Object. And it's just going to take a second or two. And then once it's converted, you'll see that this little postage stamp will change and it will have a little like square in the corner. That indicates that that is now a smart object. Now I could add any filter to it and be able to go back and readjust that filter later on during my processing. So I think the filter I want to use is the Camera Raw filter. And again, for those of you that aren't familiar with Photoshop, the Camera Raw filter is exactly the same as the Develop module of Lightroom. It uses the same process engine. It just is cosmetically different. Now to access that, make sure we're clicked on that smart object. We're going to go up to Filter, down to Camera Raw filter. And when we do that, you'll see that the image will open up in the Camera Raw dialog. And you'll see it has the same basic controls that are in that Develop module of Lightroom. And for this, I'm just going to bring, I think, highlights all the way down and look at what it does to the reflection. Now, I really don't care what it does to the rest of the image. I really don't care. I'm just looking at the highlights. We're going to use a mask to mask out the rest of the effect. So it only is affecting the reflection down here. So I have highlights all the way down. I'm going to bring whites all the way down. I might even bring exposure down a little bit. and maybe try bring clarity down a touch, and maybe bring saturation down a touch. So it's not quite as colorful down there. Now again, of course, it's affecting the entire image. Don't worry about it. Just click OK. And again, because it's a smart object, I could come back in here and readjust these if I need to. Now, another advantage of using the smart object, when it's done, when you're done adding a filter to it, the filter has a mask built in. So I'm going to go to that mask. Now I could just paint in black on the parts of the image that I don't want the effect to affect. But I think it's easier to convert this white mask to a black mask and then paint in white just on these reflections. So the effect is only affecting the reflections. So to convert this white mask into a black mask, simply make sure you're clicked on the mask, and if you have a Mac, hit Command-I. If you have a PC, hit Control-I. Now you can see the effect isn't affecting anything right now. I'll turn it off, nothing changed. Turn it on, nothing's changed. Now, get a brush, hit the B key on your keyboard to get a brush. The brush is right there. Make sure you have the black and white swatches right here. If you don't, hit the D key on your keyboard to get the black and white swatches. And make sure the white is the foreground swatch. If it isn't, hit the X key on your keyboard until the foreground swatch is white. Then make sure, click right up here, make sure that your brush is relatively soft. I'm going to have hardness all the way down. And I think for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to keep opacity at 100%. You can, of course, change that and maybe just brush in lightly the effect with an opacity less than 100%. I'm going to get a smaller brush by hitting the left bracket key, and I could readjust that and get a larger brush by hitting the right bracket key. And then I'm simply going to paint on my reflection. And what is happening now is the actual adjustment that we did in the Camera Raw filter is now coming through here. And I'm going to go very quickly, and I don't really care that I am probably not drawing very well and I'm going over the lines and it's going to look a little sloppy, but for this demonstration, you know how to do it. You could do it much more effectively than I am right here. So we have that painted in. Maybe we could paint right to a little dark. So if I want to come back in here now and readjust this, right where it says Camera Raw Filter on your layer stack, just double click there and it will open up in Camera Raw again. Now, fortunately, it doesn't bring the mask with it. We still have the entire image being affected by the adjustment. But I still think it's a little too colorful, so I'm going to bring saturation down. I'm going to click OK, and it will apply it to that. Now, those are considerably toned down. If I turn this off, on, off, on, off, on, you can see that it is making some effect there. Now, again, you could play with this a little more and make sure that you have it so it's perfect. That gives you an idea what you need to do, though. So that, I think, answers everyone's question into how you could tone down these images or these reflections. Also, I found, looking at them, they look bad. Sometimes if you walk away from your computer for a while and rest your eyes and come back, they'll either, what's wrong with them will obviously pop out, or they'll look fine. It's just from being too intimate with the portrait, you're not seeing it properly, and you have to step away for a little bit. So try that as well. All right, our next question is from Carol. When I load a landscape and sky into Photoshop, in order to replace the sky in the landscape image, they're different sizes. What am I doing wrong? All right, you're really not doing anything wrong. What you have to be aware of, though, is that if you're using a landscape and a sky image from two different cameras with two different sensors, they're very likely going to be two different resolutions, and they will be different sizes. For example, this image of Columbus was shot with a Nikon D800E, which is a full sensor high resolution camera, and you can see that it has a resolution of 7,360 by 4912. When I click on the sky over here, this was shot with a crop sensor camera, and it's at 5760 by 3434. So it is a smaller image. Now, if we open these up in Photoshop and we want to put this sky in this image, what I would recommend you do is do not open them as layers in Photoshop. Let me demonstrate. We're going to click on the sky image. We're going to hold the Command key in and click on the other image. If you have a PC, you'd hold the Control key in and click on that second image. Right-click on them, go up to Edit In, and do not go down at the bottom here where it says Open as Layers in Photoshop. Instead, go up to Edit in Adobe Photoshop. Edit the original for me is fine. Now for you, do what you need to do. Now we have them as separate tabs. Here is the cityscape and there is our sky. What you want to do is you want to move the smaller image on top of the bigger image. So click on the smaller image, which is the sky, and get the Move tool. The keyboard shortcut for the Move tool is V as in Victor. It's the very top tool right here. Just click with the left mouse button anywhere on the image itself. Keep that mouse button pressed in and drag it up to the tab that has the other image. Then when that opens, pull that image that you can't see now on top of that image and just let go of the left mouse button. Now you have the sky on top of our cityscape. Again, you could see it's really, really small. So what do we got to do? Well, we got to change the size of this layer. To do that, what I typically do is move it up to one corner like this. You want to go into free transform mode. It's very easy to do. Hit Control T if you have a PC, Command T if you have a Mac. You'll get these handles. Just be aware that if you grab a handle and start pushing or pulling, you're going to distort the pixels, meaning you're going to make, like in this handle here, is going to make the clouds stretched out. And usually for clouds, that won't matter, to tell you the truth. But what you might want to do is instead of just grabbing a handle willy-nilly like that, is hold the Shift key in and grab one of the handles in the corner. And when you pull out, it will keep the proportion proper so nothing gets distorted. What I typically do is go a little beyond where I need to be, because then I could move it and try to better place it where it needs to be. Then you could turn it off. Or first, click this checkbox that you're done with your transformation. Then you can turn it off and proceed with your sky replacement. Now I'm not going to go into that, how to do that in this questions and answers video, because that is beyond the scope of this whole video series. But below, again, this video will be a link to my Getting Started in Photoshop series, and I do replace a sky in that series, and you could check it out there, and it's very easy to do actually. So check that out in that series. Now, our final question is from Jesse. In my Photoshop, some of my filters are grayed out. Why? Well, typically, I guess I should say a lot of reasons, but mostly it's because some of the filters can't work with a specific layer or a specific layer style or a specific type of smart object. So it's kind of hit and miss. Nothing is wrong with your Photoshop. It's just the way it is. Now, for example, on this layer here, if I go up to Filter, like I have it off. See, well, that's a good example. If the layer is off and you go to Filter, they're going to be all grayed out. So make sure your filter's on, and we go to Filter. Let's see, we got 3D, they're all good. Blur, we got Smart Blurs off. So we can't do Smart Blur on this layer for some reason. Blur Gallery's good. That's good, that's good, that's good. Render, we have Lighting Effects is off. And Stylize, we have 3 off. Now let's jump, for the sake of argument, over to this smart object, and we look at Filter, and we got 2 Lens Blur and Smart Blur don't work on a smart object, and we go down to a lot under Render do not work under Smart Object, and Stylize, a lot 3 don't work there. So you get the idea. There's nothing wrong with your Photoshop. It's just the way it is. Sometimes some things work on a certain layer, or you'll need a combination of layers below the layer for one of these filters to actually work. Also, locked background layers sometimes will have things that don't work, and you'll have to unlock it by clicking on the padlock right there, and then you unlock it, and then you could go in and hopefully a filter that you want to use will work for that layer. So again, nothing's wrong with your Photoshop. It's just the way it is, and I'm sure there's reasons that Adobe has for disabling some of the filters for some types of layers, and there's really no way around that. So just keep that in mind. So that's it for episode 8 of Questions and Answers. Thank you everyone that asks questions. Thank you everyone that watches my videos. I truly do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.